God rest him wherever he is. I know that his wife is working out some sort of an agreement now with the University of Texas. In 1982, a U.S. Navy flight engineer made an emergency landing on a ridge in Antarctica and saw something in the ice was not supposed to be there. Geometric, angular, massive, made of a material that was neither ice nor rock. He was ordered never to speak about it. He signed the papers. He kept the secret for almost 20 years. And then dying, he picked up the phone and called one person, Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist Linda Moulton Howe. She recorded every word he said. Then she waited. "Brian, when did you get into the Navy, and how did you get to Antarctica?" "I enlisted in July of 1976. In order to go to Antarctica, you have to volunteer. It's not a duty station where you are ordered to go. I was able to get orders to Antarctica Development Squadron 6, which was referred to as VXE6, because over the next 25 years, more witnesses called, Navy personnel, scientists, contractors, NORAD officers, all of them describing pieces of the same thing buried beneath the Antarctic ice. All of them silenced. All of them, one by one, deciding before they died that Linda was the only person they trusted to tell the world. Now at 81, Linda has finally compiled every testimony, every coordinate, every classified detail. And she is talking. She said, "Before I die, I must tell the truth because the people who told me these things are dying, and if I do not share what they revealed, this knowledge dies with us. This is what they found. The man on the ridge." The year was 1982. A Navy flight engineer whose name Linda has protected to this day was on a routine supply run from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Somewhere over the ice sheet, an equipment malfunction forced the crew to set down early on an exposed ridge. Wind hammering the fuselage, temperatures so low that exposed skin burns in seconds. The kind of place where you fix what's broken and you leave. But while the crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer looked out across the ridge and he stopped. Something was wrong with the landscape. On a distant rise, shapes broke the horizon that did not belong. Geometric, symmetrical, too regular, too angular, too precise to be ice formations. He moved closer, close enough to see what looked like the top of a massive structure, partially exposed where wind and time had stripped the ice away. It was angular, it was solid, and it was made of something that was clearly not natural. Before he could reach it, the radio crackled. Orders. Return to McMurdo immediately. No explanation, no discussion. When they landed, intelligence officers were waiting. The crew was separated, debriefed individually, and told their flight logs were now classified. They signed additional non-disclosure agreements and they were given one instruction. This never happened. Now here's what you need to understand about Linda Moulton. How she is not a conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel. She is an Emmy Award-winning investigative journalist who has spent over 4 decades interviewing military personnel, scientists, and government officials. She built her career on documented evidence, verified credentials, and sources who could be corroborated. When the flight engineer contacted her in 1998, retired in his 70s and knowing his time was running out, she didn't rush to publish. She interviewed him for hours. She verified his service record. She confirmed his credentials. His account included specific coordinates, exact dates, and the names of other crew members on that flight. Everything checked out. But Linda knew one witness wasn't enough, so she filed his testimony away. She told no one and she waited. She had no idea what was about to start. If this is already making the hair on the back of your neck stand up, hit subscribe because what comes next makes this look like a warm-up. The pattern. Over the next 20 years, they came to her one by one. Military personnel, scientists, contractors, people who had no connection to each other, who had never met, who had been stationed at different bases in different decades, all telling Linda pieces of the same impossible story. A geophysicist who had run ice-penetrating radar surveys sat across from Linda with his jaw tight and his voice barely above a whisper. He had found cavities beneath the ice. Not small pockets, massive voids, geometrically regular, far too deep and too structured to be natural caves. When he flagged the data, his supervisor's face went white. The readings were classified within hours. His entire team was reassigned. He never saw that data again. A Navy CB construction battalion described being deployed to a classified excavation site miles from any official research station. No scientific briefing, no ice core mission, just drilling straight down. And at the bottom of the shaft, he saw something that made his stomach drop. Metallic structures, walls that looked manufactured, surfaces too smooth, too deliberate, too perfect to be geological. He stared at them and thought, someone built this. A scientist from Argentina's Esperanza base told Linda that research teams occasionally pulled artifacts from ice cores dated to over 12,000 years old. Every single time military personnel arrived, confiscated the samples and made them disappear. No logs, no reports, no published papers. Gone. A pilot who flew missions across the continent described a no-fly zone that existed on none of the public charts. An entire restricted area where civilian flights were forbidden and military flights required clearance levels almost nobody had. When he asked a superior what was down there, the answer was short. Sensitive research. Stop asking. None of these people knew each other. None of them had seen Linda's other interviews. But every testimony pointed to the same conclusion. Something ancient and structured was buried beneath the Antarctic ice, and multiple governments knew about it. Linda sat with all of these accounts spread across her desk and felt the weight of what she was holding. This was not one story. This was a pattern. A pattern she could not ignore and could not yet prove. But then someone contacted her who changed everything. The testimony that changed everything. It was 2016. Linda received a message from someone she would later describe as the most credible source she has ever interviewed in her entire career. A retired NORAD officer, classified clearance. Part of an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that does not appear in any public record. His identity is the one Linda has guarded more fiercely than any other. When he began talking, Linda went quiet because what he described did not just add to the previous testimonies. It connected them. Every isolated account, every fragment, every unexplained detail from 20 years of interviews suddenly locked into place like pieces of a machine clicking together. According to his account, based on what he was briefed on and what he personally witnessed, beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet, at a depth of approximately 2 meters, there are multiple structures of artificial origin. Not geological anomalies, not ice formations, not anything that belongs in any geology textbook. Structures built by someone, engineered with intention and precision. And they are old, far older than the ice that buried them. They predate the last ice age, meaning they were constructed when Antarctica was a green, temperate continent with rivers and forests. Over 12,000 years ago. Let that land for a second. Over 12,000 years. That is thousands of years before Sumer. Thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty, before every civilization we have ever called ancient. He told Linda, these structures were first detected in the 1940s during Operation High Jump, the massive 1946 to 1947 Antarctic expedition, led by Admiral Richard Byrd. Officially, the mission was about establishing research bases and training personnel for polar conditions. The classified reality, according to this source, was something else entirely. Seismic surveys that picked up anomalies deep beneath the ice that no one could explain and no one was supposed to talk about. And here's the part that should stop you cold. Since then, for over 7 decades, the United States, Russia, and more recently, China have been running covert recovery operations across Antarctica. Not research, recovery, archaeological excavation, and technological retrieval conducted entirely separate from the public science programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. The structures, he told Linda, are not small. They are not an outpost. What has been found appears to be an extensive urban complex, buildings, infrastructure, technology, suggesting a civilization so advanced it challenges every assumption we hold about human history. Some areas are accessible through natural ice caves where shifting glaciers have created openings. Others are being reached through drilling operations disguised as routine scientific research and the technology being pulled from these structures. Pay close attention to this. Some of it still works. Not all of it is understood, but functional devices have been recovered and are currently being studied at classified facilities. Linda asked the question any journalist would ask. Prove it. The officer provided coordinates. He provided internal documents redacted but showing classified project designations at the exact locations he described. And he gave her names, other personnel involved in these operations, people she could find, people she could call. But the thing Linda couldn't stop thinking about was the silence on the other end of her own mind. 20 years of scattered testimonies had just become one story. And that story was bigger than anything she had ever investigated. What she didn't know yet was that the most disturbing testimony was still coming. What they found inside a military contractor who worked a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda, but only because he was dying. Cancer terminal, and he could not take what he had seen to the grave. He described being lowered into an ice shaft that had been drilled to access what his briefing called a geological anomaly. The descent was slow. The platform creaked under his weight as it dropped deeper into the shaft foot by foot. The daylight above shrinking to a bright coin and then to nothing. The walls were ice, white, blue-veined, featureless. The cold was total. The only sounds were the hum of the winch and his own breathing echoing off the shaft walls. Then over a mile down, something changed. The ice stopped. Not gradually, it ended. The walls shifted to something smooth, almost metallic. A surface with a faint sheen that caught his headlamp. A surface that had no business being a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature felt different. The acoustics shifted. Even the air had a different quality, like stepping from one room into another. He stepped off the platform into a cavity that was clearly, unmistakably not natural. The space opened around him. It was enormous. There were markings on the walls, symbols, geometric patterns, unlike any writing system anyone on his team had ever seen. The team stood in silence, flashlights cutting through a darkness that had not been disturbed in thousands of years. And then he saw it set into the far wall. A doorway, not a crack, not a gap. A constructed entrance framed, deliberate, leading somewhere deeper. His hands were shaking. He could feel his pulse in his throat. The team was not authorized to go further. That required a clearance level none of them held. But he watched as scientists and military personnel in specialized equipment prepared to enter. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this before. He was sent back to the surface. He was paid a substantial bonus. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that threatened criminal prosecution. And he carried what he saw in silence for years until the cancer diagnosis made secrecy feel meaningless. He told Linda, "People should know we found something down there. Something that changes everything we think we know about history." Now, listen to what else Linda's investigation turned up. Because the testimonies didn't stop, they accelerated. A satellite imagery analyst told her he'd watched certain Antarctic coordinates get digitally scrubbed from public data. Not just reduced in resolution, but actively obscured, blurred, erased. He had seen the originals before processing. Rectilinear shapes, formations that looked engineered. He sat at his desk staring at structures that should not exist. And when he raised it with supervisors, he was told those areas were under special access protocols. Not his concern. A materials scientist who briefly analyzed samples from Antarctic recovery operations described alloys matching. Nothing in any known database. Corrosion resistance off the charts. Strength-toe ratios that shouldn't be possible. Manufacturing signatures that current technology cannot replicate. A logistics coordinator for the NSF Antarctic program found equipment manifests that matched no known research mission. Industrial excavation tools, sealed transport containers with armed military escorts, shipments routed through Department of Defense channels entirely outside scientific oversight. Every new witness added something more unsettling than the last. Symbols carved into walls that no linguist on any team could decode. Electronic equipment that went haywire near certain excavation sites, instruments spinning, readings spiking from electromagnetic interference with no identifiable source. And then the claim that sent shock waves through Linda's entire network. Multiple sources independently confirmed that recovered artifacts had been transported to classified U.S. facilities for reverse engineering, not study reverse engineering. The picture was no longer fragmentary, it was enormous. And it was screaming to be told, but telling it meant risking everything Linda had built over 40 years. The silence. By 2020, Linda had over 15 credible testimonies, verified coordinates, confirmed names and affiliations, a body of evidence that taken together pointed to one of the most consequential secrets in modern history. And then her sources started dying one by one. The people who had trusted her with the most dangerous secrets of their lives were running out of time. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the one who started all of this with a phone call in 1998, died in 2019. Linda got the news and sat with it in silence. Then the NORD officer, her most important source, the man whose single testimony had connected 2 decades of scattered accounts into one staggering picture. He died in 2022, others were in steep decline. Hospital beds, hospice care, fading memories. And Linda, now in her 80s, understood something with brutal clarity. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of these testimonies together, the last thread connecting the witnesses to the world. That realization changed her. It did not just motivate her, it terrified her. Because if she waited any longer, 25 years of investigation, the life's work of a dozen dying men who had chosen truth over silence would vanish, gone, as if none of it ever happened. She said in a 2023 interview, "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survive." In late 2023, she began assembling what she calls the comprehensive Antarctic report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, every piece of evidence gathered across 25 years of investigation. And in early 2024, she released portions through earthfiles.com. She published specific coordinates where witnesses reported exposed structures or underground access points. She shared declassified Operation High Jump documents with redacted sections hinting at objectives far beyond research stations. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough credential detail to establish credibility. She compiled the satellite imagery showing artificial data obscuration over the exact areas her sources identified. And she made a direct challenge. Other nations have satellites. Independent researchers have ice-penetrating radar. Scientists work on that continent every single day. If these testimonies are true, the evidence is there. She told the world where to look. Now, here's the part that keeps me up at night. The response from every implicated government was identical. Total absolute silence. No denials, no corrections, no lawsuits, no charges, no official statement of any kind, nothing. Just silence so complete it felt deliberate because it was. Think about that. An Emmy Award-winning journalist publicly accuses multiple world governments of running a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology beneath Antarctic ice. And not a single government says a word, not one denial, not one press release calling it fiction. Linda says that silence is the loudest confirmation she could have received. If she were lying, discrediting her would be easy. A single official statement would end it. But addressing her investigation forces a choice no government wants to make. Confirm what she's revealing or explain why dozens of credible military and scientific personnel are all independently fabricating the same story. So they say nothing, and the silence grows louder. Independent researchers started digging. Amateur satellite analysts examined her coordinates and reported anomalies. Scientists submitted requests for historical radar data from the areas she identified. Most requests were denied, classified as national security material for geological data from a continent supposedly dedicated to peaceful scientific research. One former Antarctic station worker came forward publicly to back Linda's claims, stating what anyone who has worked on that continent for extended periods already knows. There are areas you do not go, questions you do not ask, and classified military operations that have nothing to do with science happening right alongside the research programs the public sees. The implications, if even a fraction of this is accurate, are staggering. A civilization advanced enough to build cities existed over 12,000 years ago. Thousands of years before Sumer, before Egypt, before every culture we consider ancient. Human progress is not the neat linear story we were taught. Knowledge was lost, and it may be quietly, secretly being recovered right now. Linda is currently producing a comprehensive documentary presenting every testimony in full. She has deposited copies of her complete investigation, including names of sources who gave a posthumous permission for identification with multiple institutions' insurance. So the information survives no matter what happens to her. She put it simply, I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I'm asking them to look at the testimonies. These are real people, real credentials, real experiences. And if even half of what they told me is accurate, we are living in a world very different from what we've been taught. Those witnesses are mostly gone now. But their testimonies are documented. Their accounts are preserved. And Linda Moulton, how at 81 years old kept her promise to every one of them. She told the truth. But here's the question I can't shake. And I don't think you can either. If multiple governments have known about structures beneath Antarctica for over 70 years, if they've been recovering technology from a civilization that predates everything in our history books, if they've built an entire apparatus of secrecy around it while telling us that continent is nothing but ice and penguins, then what else are they hiding? And what happens when they can't hide it anymore? If you made it this far, you already know this channel doesn't look away from the stories that matter. Subscribe. Share. This with someone who needs to see it.